Okay, so we're going to start 12 seconds early because Bobby and Ken are giving me the big wave sounds like we're in a hurry. I'm by myself this morning, which was not intended. Juanita had a rough night, didn't sleep real well. Rodney didn't tell me exactly what it was, but just, anytime your spouse doesn't sleep through the night and he's doing the right thing, he's with her, which is where he should be, which is where I would be if it had been Cheryl. So I miss him, and unfortunately this is our last Sunday for this series and also for he and I being in the auditorium. So that's kind of a little downer, but I'm hoping that Juanita is feeling better and that it's nothing other than just some sort of regular sickness or something. So we'll be praying for them and keeping them in our thoughts. We have a lot to cover this morning, believe it or not. So usually I can talk pretty quickly, so we'll see if we get through it all. And then if I talk too fast, we might get out early. And I don't see anybody looking like they'd be upset if that happened. So we'll just go at the pace we go at, and we'll see what happens. The other thing is that normally Donna Johnson is sitting right over there, and she's online this morning. I've been talking with her in email. She's also had some tests and is awaiting results on Tuesday, and so we want to be mindful of her and keep her in your prayers as well. And there will be several cartoons this morning for Donna, because she said I will be watching, and she loves the cartoons. And I know we had 2 weeks of like really hard no cartoons because it was really deep subjects that were not funny at all. And now this week we have some things that there's just numerous cartoons out there. If you ever get bored, I can tell you how to search for them on Google. So what Dr. Cloud and I were doing, and this ties back actually all the way to the very first time he and I spoke or taught in here together, and that was the Hebrews chapter 11, the great hall of fame, if you will, of people that are in that chapter, all from the Old Testament, that are all outlined as being the heroes of faith. And rather than going through all of that in detail, because you're going to say, hey, Stan, you've already done that with us, we're not going to go through each one as far as their character studies. We did that when we did the character sketches of different characters. Also, before I forget, you notice we sang that song this morning that has I raised my Ebenezer. And thanks to your participation with us in the word study, you know that the Ebenezer is a stone of help. So when you sang that song, hopefully that meant a little more to you. Same way with the faith heroes from Hebrews 11. We've done character sketches on them, so we're just gonna tie some items together. Yeah, Joe. Old Testament reference. Oh, to a stone of help. All over the place. I mean, I don't have them all off the top of my head, book and verse, but anywhere God was present somewhere. Elijah, for example, would make an altar, make a place to be remembered, a marker of a stone of help would be an Ebenezer. So we had this slide, if I'm not mistaken. We had this slide, if I'm not mistaken, last week. We just said that faith equals real, genuine trust. That's what all these people are examples of. Confidence equals a basis and solid ground. Hope is something that we fully expect, not something we wish for or rub a genie's lamp and hope that something happens, or positive thinking or anything like that. We've turned that word, unfortunately, in English into that concept. But hope is the absolute assurance of what God has promised us will happen. It's just that, as we also sang in the last song this morning before we read the lyrics right at the end, will be his kingdom until then, until he comes and the kingdom is here fully. So hope is knowing that the kingdom will come and also knowing that it's not fully here. Does that make sense? It's a guarantee of the promise, even though we haven't seen the entire promise revealed yet. And then assurance equals conviction. But there's also something else to consider, and that's faithless or faithlessness, depending on how you want to say the word. Because without faith, it says in verse 6, and without faith it is impossible to please God. I mean, just think about that. Without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. I read something yesterday that ties into this. Somebody was saying, actually it was C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis has I won't get it exactly word for word quote right, but C.S. Lewis said something to the effect of, I used to not believe in God, and I used to not believe that the universe was just. And he said, but then it occurred to me, well, what would I be comparing it to know that it's not? And that's kind of the same thing about faith. To have faith, you can't please God if you don't believe he exists. C.S. Lewis found that out over his lifetime, that he basically was saying something to the equivalent of like, if this aisle right here was not straight, and we all came in here and said, man, that aisle's just crazy crooked. Who put this in? Well, we'd have something in our mind that was straight that we were comparing it to, right? And that's how C.S. Lewis says should be how we look at God. God is perfect, and everything God does is right. Anything that's not God, we're comparing to God. Same thing with faith. If you don't have it, then what would you compare it to? You've got to believe in him in order for him to be pleased with you. And so we see all the people who have faith. We see that by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, that's an interesting word, holy reverence, holy awe, not afraid that God was the disciplinarian that was going to come strike him dead if he didn't build the boat. But because he believed in God, because he had faith in God, he built the boat. So the fear there is a healthy fear. It's a respect and a awe. Out of holy fear, he built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping the faith. So here comes some cartoons for Donna. You can go out there and you can get all kinds of cartoons about Noah. It's pretty easy. You boys get back to work, act your age instead of like a bunch of teenagers. Because Noah's 600 years old here, old Noah and his 100-year-old boys talking about building the boat, right? We forget about that. We forget that Noah is extremely old and that it took 100 years to build the ark. Now you think some of us have been ridiculed for something we're doing that we think God's called us to do. We're either called goody two-shoes, or somebody says something negative or tries to attack what we're doing. Try that for your entire lifetime, or actually longer for many of us. Try that for 100 years of building a boat. And it gets even more interesting when we ask this question. Rain, 100 years? You got 100 years you're doing this building project. I love some of these pictures that Dr. Cloud found where Noah's got the architectural designs. You see the skeleton there of the ark coming together in the back. You see the boys that are working on it. But we forget that if you read closely in the Bible, it hasn't rained before. The mist came up in the mornings and kind of took care of everything. And what I think that's how we get irrigation systems. I'm not sure, Joe, but I'm pretty sure that's how companies came up with these little pop-up things that come up in the morning at the hotels and around business offices, come out of the ground, water everything, and then go back down. I think that's biblical. I think that's how the mist came up and watered everything, right? But when these people are walking around making fun of them for building a boat, that they would have no concept what a boat is, what it's for, and it hasn't rained, and they probably don't have it sitting anywhere near a body of water, you can just imagine how much they're getting poked at and how much people are ridiculing them. And so you have something like this. Let me get this straight. You hear a voice say, if you build it, they will come. Field of streams instead of field of dreams. See, Rodney really needs to be here for this because he's the big baseball nut, and he would go for the next 5 minutes on Kevin Costner and the Field of Dreams. But the Field of Streams is you build a boat, and there's going to be a whole bunch of water, and that all the animals will come, as I'm assuming what it means when he says, build it and they will come. 2 by 2, the animals. Or maybe this one, an ark. Well, it's kind of a big, old, floating zoo. Can you imagine Noah trying to explain it to people what it is? And this is the gopher wood at the lumber desk. And you see that his ark kit there says, number 1 item, gopher wood, lots of nails, 1,500 gallons of flex seed, and what else does it say? Fishing pole and water wings, just in case, I guess, he wants to get off. I don't think he would get off the boat. And Moses visits the local lumber yard to buy a literal boatload of stuff. You guys are really, really hard audience this morning. I figured more. I see some smiles. There's just a few cracking smiles now. Or maybe this one. Hopefully Donna's really liking this. Say, Sonny, that's a lot of lumber. What you fixing to build? Says Gary Gopher's lumber yard. You have to say it like the little gopher, you know. Noah places his first lumber order. We don't really know where he got all the lumber, honestly. You go up to Kentucky and you look at the Ark recreation, and you know they've had some liberties. I like it personally. I think it looks, I don't know, sort of like boatish, but not so much so that we would make it too modern. But the sheer size of the thing is what's really amazing. And I don't really know where all of the gopher wood came from, but some of these cartoons do kind of make you laugh and also think. And then you have Moses. I had a brain cramp there. You have Noah talking to the people. Who knows what he's been saying over this 100-year period? I don't know that he's been necessarily preaching, but he probably hasn't been hiding. The text doesn't really tell us. If anything, what it tells us is that they're so against God that probably no one would have asked. And I don't know if we've thought about that, but Noah could have preached all he wanted to and tried to save more people than his family, but probably what's really happening is nobody's listening to him and nobody cares, and they just think he's a crazy person and he's building a boat in the middle of nowhere, right? Which is sad, but we can assume that everything that was supposed to be on the boat was on the boat, right? So that means things that aren't here didn't make it to the boat. Like, come on, Ralph, what part of the whole RSVP concept didn't you get? And so the world says goodbye to Mr. and Mrs. Unicorn because they didn't make it to the boat. I've seen another one that I may have used in here before where the dinosaurs are out there walking and they're like, oh, was that today? Whoops. So, yeah, some things that may have been are not because they were not on the boat. And that the Ark exhibit up in Kentucky actually covers that too. If you walk through and you look at all the paintings on the wall from one of the rooms, it kind of walks you through the different scenes. And if you look closely in the water, you will see things in the water. Cheryl and I picked out dinosaurs and other, crazy animal things that are all drowning as the scene has been painted on the wall because those were not things that were put on the Ark. So it's funny, and it also might be somewhat true. Now, this we know happens too from the narrative. We have the people that after it started raining and after God shut the door on the boat, then they believe, right? Because they're up to, if this guy is saying it was already up to waist high, that Willie admitted that he was in trouble. Okay, you were right, and I was wrong, Mr. Noah et al. But by then it was too late. I know some of you are like, boy, the puns just keep going, right? I need Jan Blackwell up here with me. He would get some with us. And again, Noah saying things like, you heard me right, rain. Cats and dogs reign of biblical proportions. We've heard that phrase, it's going to rain cats and dogs. Your 40-day forecast there that he's pointing to. This was the very last time a weatherman was right, according to this cartoonist, because it was predicted by God. But then we see other markers of faith once we get through some of the funny stuff. We see the way that the dove was sent out, right? And you remember, most likely, that it was sent out more than once. It was sent out and the waters weren't low enough and came back. And so it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, we're not ready yet. And then it was sent out again, and when it came back with the olive branch, which is also interesting that it's an olive branch, which would specify or signify peace, it comes back and lets them know that it's safe to get off the boat. So, continuing with faith, think about Abraham, which obviously follows Noah. Abraham had a completely different situation, but yet the faith call was very similar. Noah is building a boat for 100 years, and people are probably, like we said, ridiculing him. Abraham has a leave your family and go to a place that I will show you. So think about taking a trip. I know some of us, some people even related to me, will not go anywhere without knowing all the itinerary and having everything ready to go, and you rethink everything, you double check everything you've packed. You got to know where you're going, how long it's going to take. You got to have a spare tire in the car. You got to have all that emergency stuff, right? In case you break down or something happens in the travel. Well, Abraham didn't have any of that. He didn't even know where they were going. He didn't even know how long it would take to get there. But he had faith to do that. And so it says in verse 8, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went. That's pretty incredible. I think as we've become more dependent on things and we've become more independent or autonomous, we actually think that we need everything laid out and all the information before us before we would even take a step out of the house, right? We're not going to leave our safe place to go to a possibly unsafe place unless we know we're going to journey through the unsafe to arrive at another safe place. But Abraham didn't know any of that. He obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. And then verse 9, by faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. That would be weird, right? That would be like us going to some other place where English is not spoken. And we go and, how long are we going to be here? Well, we're going to be here for the foreseeable future. It's not just a week vacation where maybe we can learn a few words. We're going to be here for the foreseeable future, and we're not even aware of the culture or the language, or we don't fit in. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God, which is also what we sang about. I love that Kingdom Until Then song because it's scripture basically sung that we know that God will be returning to live with us. We know that there'll be a new Jerusalem, which just is the new city of peace. It's not that geographic place necessarily. It's just the name, the new city of peace, and God will be living with us. And so that's basically what the end of verse 10 says here, is that a city whose foundations are made by the architect and builder who is God, which is what we're waiting for too. And if you look at where Abraham had to go, look at this map, you see that he was down in Ur, and he leaves Ur. If you follow the black line there on your right, he goes to Babylon, and then from Babylon to Haran. I mean, that's a pretty decent journey. And then he goes down through Aram or Damascus to Canaan, and then ultimately to Egypt. And that's probably more than any of us would sign up to walk for, right? We wouldn't want to be told we're going to walk today from here to Murfreesboro, much less to some major area far away with elevation in between us. And so maybe you go out there and you find some cartoons for Abraham. Well, so much for the golden years. Abraham and Sarah there on the mailbox that says 101 something lane. So at age 75, Abraham receives word from God that retirement is on hold. That's also something we don't usually consider in the story. We just kind of default to, well, biblical people lived a lot longer than us. Well, yes, some of them. And then by the time we get to the New Testament, biblical people live a lot shorter lifetimes than we do. So we've gone from living, humanity that is, gone from living longer periods of time in the Old Testament when God had things for people to do that needed to be done however long they took, like building an ark or calling Abraham, having children at 199, not something we would even consider happening today. But then by the time we get to the New Testament, the average age of somebody in the New Testament is like 40s old. 50, 60, 70, pretty much unheard of, right? So even that kind of stuff we have to keep in our mind as we move through the stories. And then moving on to verse 11. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead. That's an interesting phrase, right? He as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. And this is something we refer to a lot. We always talk about being children of Abraham. We even have a song in VBS, Father Abraham, I am one, so are you. Let's go praise the Lord. That's true. We're all related now. Everybody who's alive is related to Abraham. And it is fascinating that when you see that sentence that says that he was good as dead, God made a way not only for Sarah, we knew that, right? We look at the woman's age and say, well, that doesn't seem like that would be possible unless God intervenes. But we also have to take into account the male's age too, So if he's good as dead, meaning he would have no offspring, he would have no descendants, his life would have just come to an end right then. And I think that's foreshadowing all the way over to the New Testament with Mary. Gabriel comes and explains to Mary that the Holy Spirit is going to overshadow her, and she asks, how will this be? And Gabriel tells her that God's going to make it possible. That impossibility that a virgin woman would give birth to a baby is equal to the impossibility that a 99-year-old and a 100-year-old would have given birth to a baby. The only difference is this was done naturally with a human father and human mother, and Mary is being explained how it's going to happen without a human father and not natural, right? So that's even interesting to contrast and compare. And then we've talked about, when we went through the word study, we talked about Isaac's name. And so here's another little cartoon. Laugh out loud. No, I am not laughing at you. I am laughing with you, is supposedly what Sarah might have tried to say after she got caught laughing. But the three men tell Abraham that Sarah will have a baby in a year. And since Sarah was very old, these men were not doctors. Sarah laughed. Interesting, that phrase, these men were not doctors. But if you read that text real carefully, one of those men's name is Yahweh. So that was God present with Abraham and Sarah that they invited into their house, and they told her that they were going to have a baby, and then she laughed. And then we've got a list. I don't know how well you can see this. This is just a textual list of all these people were still living by faith when they died. And it starts up there with Abel, which, we usually read the story of Cain and Abel and then we move on, right? We don't have a whole bunch of discussion about Abel that much. But you've got that in Genesis 4, 1 through 15 with the faithful sacrifice. You've got Enoch's faith, walked with God, and was no more, taken home, didn't see death, at least didn't see death before the flood, which I think is an interesting thing to keep in mind too. Noah's faith, he built the ark, we talked about that. Abraham's faith followed as God led. Sarah's faith came to believe what was impossible. Maybe I can read these without having you look at the back of my head if I read them off my phone. Isaac's faith foretold the future. Jacob's faith, God would fulfill his promises. Joseph's faith, his bones to rest in Canaan. Remember, he told his sons, when I die, take my bones with you so that they can be in the place. Don't leave me in Egypt. Moses' faith forsook Egypt for Israelites. He grew up as an Egyptian. He lived there for 40 years. And then protecting the Hebrew, he ended up having to go out and do farming or shepherding for 40 years. Joshua's faith, walls of Jericho fell. Rahab's faith cast her lot with the Israelites. Remember her saying that she believed that Yahweh was the true God when asked why she protected the spies. Gideon's faith waxed mighty in war with very few people, we might add. No weapons, some lanterns, some pottery, and a trumpet. That's pretty amazing. And then God just kept paring his army down and down and down to what would seem like would be an impossible task. Barak's faith seduced kingdoms in Judges 4. Samson's faith, from weakness he was made strong, even though Samson has a little dip there that we went over when we talked about him. Jephthah's faith defeated armies. David's faith obtained promises. Daniel's faith stopped the mouths of lions. The lion's den, and then we can also think about like the fiery furnace scene too. Jeremiah's faith, he was tortured. Elijah's faith raised from the dead. Elisha's faith raised from the dead. Zechariah's faith stoned, and Isaiah's faith sawn asunder from the tradition, supposedly. That's the picture there that's, actually it's on another slide. But we're not positive on that, but that is the traditional belief. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. That's interesting, right? They didn't get to see the total fulfillment of the promise. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. And I would say, back to the song we sung this morning, we do that a lot. We like to point to this world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. And everybody goes, oh, yeah. Except this world is our home, and we're not just passing through. It's just not the way it is. It's going to be renewed. It's going to be redeemed. It's going to be when the New Jerusalem comes, when God returns to live amongst us like was in Genesis. So it's not to just abandon the place and not care, not do any of the job that God actually created us to do, to steward creation and to have it be subdued to us. It's actually the opposite. It's actually believing by faith that all of that will be the case and that God will be here living among us. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. So in other words, saying, you go out so far from Tennessee, let's say, and you get to one of these other places, and you say, well, I liked Tennessee better, so I'll go back. Well, they kind of did that, right? When they left Egypt with Moses, that was what the people complained about. We had it better in Egypt. Let's go back to Egypt. But if they'd gone back to Egypt, they would have returned to indentured service as well. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them, which is also what we sung about, which is also what Revelation talks about. So I hope all that makes sense and as exciting as I think that it is. And now my phone just took my slides away from me. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. Even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned, Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death, which is also fascinating, right? It's very clearly stated right there, but we've probably said a lot of that when we've done this study, is that why was he willing to offer Isaac? Well, we've said it already this morning. It was an impossibility that somebody at 199 would have a child, but God promised that they would. They did. Then God, so you see God make a promise and it come to fruition, right? Because they have Isaac. Then they hear God make a promise that through Isaac, all the nations of the world will be blessed. Well, if Isaac's dead, that would be hard to do. So what this is saying is that Abraham believed and had the faith that God gave him Isaac, which was an impossibility to begin with, and if he had to sacrifice him, he would give him back because God had already made another promise that promise was contingent on Isaac. That's awesome when you think about it. And then I read another scholar who said this. I don't have this on the slides. He said that two things happened that day. When God stops Abraham's hand and the ram is provided, two things are basically put out on notice to the rest of the world, to the rest of the ancient Near East area. One is that God keeps his promises and that he will provide, which is what we usually go with, right? Which is true. The second one is that God, Yahweh, will not accept firstborn sons or children offerings to have any type of leverage or appeasement to God's, because he provided the ram. If you think about that, if you know the context of the surrounding areas, they all believed that. They believed that if things got really bad, they'd just take their children and offer them to Moloch or whoever the other god being was, and then they would have better futures, or they would have their problem solved, right? This sent a message that Yahweh doesn't accept children as sacrifice. I hadn't seen that before, so hopefully that makes a strong point for you too. So God would have given Isaac back to Abraham if the ram had not been provided to fulfill God's promise. And then, I did put it there. A polemic, just meaning, a contrast or a pushback, attack back on the standards from the elsewhere of offering one's firstborn to other gods for favor. Yahweh wasn't going to accept that. So that's pretty powerful to me. He is the reason there's an Isaac, and he also doesn't want Isaac given back, even though Abraham believes that if he had, God would have given him back to him, because that's not the type of God Yahweh is. He doesn't want children sacrificed to him. Verse 20, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. And of course we know that story, and we went through it when we talked about them, that there's that deceit there, and there's the blessing and the birthright. And so the birthright cartoon is pretty funny. You've got Esau, who doesn't respect it that much, and so there again from the back pew, he says, veggie soup, great, birthright, sweet deal. This birthright trade for a bowl of soup in Genesis 25 remained the most lopsided trade until Babe Ruth was traded from the Boston Red Sox to the New York Yankees in 1919. I needed Rodney here for that one, because he didn't tell us all about that. Probably knows more about baseball. No, the saying should be, he's probably forgotten more about baseball than I've ever known about baseball. That's what I meant to say. So he's at home laughing probably right now. But yeah, lopsided trade for sure. I mean, to not understand what the birthright actually means. The firstborn, it's so strange and foreign to us. Like I've got a sister. I'm not going to ask people to raise their hands on who have sibling. I'm pretty sure that it'd almost be everybody. But you think of families today, and parents don't say, well, whoever was born first, gets the lion's share of everything, and it's really the whole future of our family, and everybody else is an also then, or just a second-rate family citizen, right? But that's how it was then. It was that way for numerous reasons we can't all go into all the details with right now. But the firstborn was the one that was responsible, that if the father passed away, the firstborn had to basically start running the family. And these families were big families. They were more like compounds. There might be as many as 20 to 30 human beings living together in a family, quote-unquote, unit in the time of the Old Testament. And it would be multiple generations of people, right? So the firstborn had to know all of the stuff to continue the family if the patriarch in the family passed away. So you'd have to know about farming, you'd have to know about land ownership, you'd have to know about providing for the family, all that stuff. So there was a big weight on the firstborn. And so one of the reasons the firstborn would have the birthright was because of all that. And so Esau basically is saying he doesn't either see that or doesn't care. And Jacob sees it as something he would never have been able to get. And he takes. So that makes me scratch my head. That pretty much just means Esau either did not want that responsibility, which might be the case, or he didn't understand. Maybe he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed and didn't understand what he actually stood in line to inherit. And of course, then he finds out, this is what this drawing is, Esau finds out, you can tell it's him because he's got all the hair all over him and he's red. He finds out that the blessing has already been given. And, it's kind of like, you missed it. I can't redo it, which we don't understand that really either, right? I mean, most of the time in our world, if somebody has something that goes wrong, there's always some sort of contingency. You can always come and make some argument, or there can be a second one produced. Not so with the blessing that's coming from God through the father, through the family head father, to the firstborn son. Once that's been done, that's done. Which also, I don't think we think about or understand that much. And then we see Joseph, which is a different story. He's not the firstborn, but he's the most loved and the favored by Jacob. And so Joseph's brothers, the original Soggy Bottom Boys, if you've seen the movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? He's saying there in the cartoon, I am loved, and he's saying he's loved because he gets the coat of many colors, right? And his dad is basically saying, this is the son of all of them that I choose to be the sheik or the prince, whichever word you want to use, as the most highly accoladed one. And he also sends Joseph out to go do administrative tasks over his other brothers, which also makes them mad. So Oh, Brother, Where Art Thou, if you're familiar with the movie, the 2000 film starring George Clooney, was a remake of the classic story of Joseph and his brothers. Did you know that? David's shaking his head no. So, I don't know. I'm just putting these up, and this is somebody else's opinion. I've only seen parts of that movie, but for those of you who have seen it, maybe that's a true statement. Verse 21. Okay, Joe says it's a bit of a stretch. It may be a bit of a stretch. Verse 21. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Now, this is where he crosses them and blesses them opposite. And so Joseph's dying instructions proved his undying trust in God's promises. Hebrews 11:22. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. Again, what we referenced a while ago, take my bones out of this area and bury them with my family and with my fathers. Here's another picture of what it might have looked like. Death of Jacob on the deathbed there with the family around. And again, this is stuff we don't, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess we kind of do the same thing, but we have a much more medical view of death, I think now, where most people don't die as if it's a family reunion. They die more somewhere like in a hospital or with hospice care or something, and then the family gets together at the funeral. Well, this and lots of other situations suggest that that's not how it was. It was actually at that dying moment was more like the funeral while the person was still with them, which is just strange for us. Usually that's just intimate family, of immediate family, like spouse, maybe kids, depending upon what the situation is. Verse 23, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. And remember, again, this is baby boys 2 years and under will be put to death, Hebrew baby boys. So they make the basket, which is basically an ark. If you remember that, when Dr. Cloud and I went through it, all the similarities in the construction of the basket, the waterproofing of the basket, the construction of the ark, and the waterproofing of the ark, all the same words in Hebrew, which just kind of makes it undeniable that you see the connection. Another picture there of baby Moses being put in that's more like a basket you keep magazines in next to the side of your sofa. That's probably not what the basket looked like, but that's all right. It's a pretty basket nonetheless. And then Moses, like we referenced a while ago, sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew and goes into defense mode and defends the Hebrew and kills him, right? So in verse 23, by faith Moses, when he'd been grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as a greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. Now, that's a fascinating verse because I don't know how we would know what he knew, when he knew it, how much of that is looking back versus looking forward, but we do know this. We know the sentences there about not valuing the treasures of Egypt. When we went through that with you, we talked about how he was raised in Pharaoh's household. And similarly to the firstborn that we just talked about with the birthright, if you were raised in Pharaoh's household, you had to be prepared education-wise for speaking, presenting, and being a military leader in case the Pharaoh died. You would then, regardless really of your age, you would maybe be called up to stand in for him. Moses had all that. He grew up with all that information and schooling and training and the look and feel of being Egyptian. He was probably more Egyptian-like than he was Hebrew-like until this occurred, and then we saw his true allegiance. So, another cartoon for Donna. Moses kills an Egyptian and hides him in the sand, Exodus 2, and as you can see there, they're suggesting they didn't hide him completely, and that's how people found out. I've always wondered about that, Joe. Like, who saw him? Or how did they know he killed him? Or did he just do a poor job of burying him in the sand? Point is, he didn't get away with it, and he had to flee. And then we get to the Passover. By faith, He left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He preserved because he saw him who is invisible. And by faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. And they used the hyssop branches and they put the blood over the doorposts. And in John's account of the gospel, he has a hyssop branch extended to Jesus on the cross with the sponge of the vinegar on it. And that's interesting because that connection that John's making with the hyssop branch is the hyssop branch that they dipped in the lamb's blood to put over the doorposts. So another Old Testament to New Testament connection. We know how this went down. When the death angel came through, it was definitely a rude awakening to Pharaoh and all of the firstborn in Egypt. And so he tells them to get out and don't let the door hit you on the way out, is what this person suggests. In exchange for Moses calling off the Egyptian plague infestation extravaganza, Pharaoh agrees to let the children of Israel go. But remember, when that agreement comes, it comes in the middle of the night because the death angel has passed through. And so imagine getting woken up at maybe, 3 in the morning and say, you're leaving right now, pack your stuff and get out. That's why God told them how to observe the Passover, to be prepared to travel, to have their staff in their hands, their cloak tucked in their sash and their sandals on, because he knew that when the word came, they were going to be moving out at a rude hour of the morning. This one was kind of funny. Quick, Moses, the chariots are coming, and he's practicing supposedly backstage. Of course, we know he didn't do this, but okay, it's showtime, and he's warming up, splitting the goldfish bowl of water with his staff. But by faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. And of course, we know that Moses is standing in for God. He's representing God like Pharaoh is standing in for the Egyptian gods and representing them. But Moses couldn't have done any of that without Yahweh behind him. And they do walk on dry ground. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea, and when the Egyptians tried, they were drowned. Several different pictures of them walking through. But back to faithlessness. Don't be faithless, Ned. Don't be one of these people that, I believe in God, but I'm going to take my water wings, my snorkel, my mask, and my flippers just in case. Now, we know people that do this, right? God's with you. Oh, I know that, but I also need this, and this, just in case. Just in case what? He's the creator of the universe. You don't need any of that. So don't be a Ned. Ned crossed the Red Sea with his faith the size of a mustard seed intact, it says. And oftentimes I think we're guilty of doing the same. Verse 30, by faith the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. And by faith the prostitute Rahab, in the lineage to Jesus, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient, but remembered to this day as being somebody who claimed that Yahweh is the true God. So the 2 spies escaped Jericho with the help of Rahab, the prostitute. Note, being saved by a prostitute were not words easily understood by their wives. Probably not. Little humor there. Sometimes humor like that I think is pretty good because we miss that stuff in the story. I mean, we just read it and kind of go, oh, sure, Rahab, prostitute, yeah, faithful, believed in God, hid the spies, lied about, didn't know where they were. What were they doing there with that area of town with her anyway, type thing is what we would, if it happened today, would be the questions that would come. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, we read that verse. Joshua, please remember me as Rahab, not Rahab the prostitute. That's what she really wanted, according to this cartoonist. Had but one request after Jericho fell, but no, she's remembered in Joshua 2:1 and 6:17 and 25 as Rahab the prostitute. So unfortunately, that title lives on with her for now. And then we look at the conclusion here, verse 32. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. That was the last one on that list a while ago. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. They are the Hall of Fame. That's what the chapter's about. That's what this, as you can see, it kind of fades away, but there's names there etched on the wall, kind of like you'd go in a mausoleum. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. All of these people that we read about in the Old Testament will be with us when that new Jerusalem, when new heavens and new earth fully arrive. That's also a fascinating thing. So, this was planned for both of us to say, but it's straight up 11. We've been with you in here since January, which seems like it was just yesterday, and then yet I realized that next Sunday is October. We've enjoyed every minute of it. I think I can speak for Dr. Cloud as well. I'm thinking that we're just taking a break over the winter because the holidays are always weird. You don't want to start a real in-depth study and several people traveling, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, all that. So maybe we'll be back in here in January or somewhere on campus in a class together. But we wanted to just say from Numbers 6, 24 through 26, the Lord bless you and protect you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And we even wanted to say not only that, but from us, from Rodney and from Stan.